a little context on my background. So I got my PhD in information, whatever that is, from the University of Michigan School of Information. And while I was there, I studied human-computer interaction and social technologies, in particular online communities, which then later became social media. We just might have a name for it. It was interesting, but not as maybe diverse in the ways that we could interact back then. And then I taught at the University of Maryland for 4 years, before coming here about 4 years ago, and have had a nice time meeting with Peter and Rick West and others here. And the educational interest came later. So I don't consider myself an educator by training, in my own field maybe, but not an educational scholar by training, but I collaborate with good educators and do a lot of interdisciplinary work like you mentioned. And the way that I like to do interdisciplinary work is find someone who's really good in their field and then partner with them on projects that we couldn't have done without each other. So we do a lot of those. Incidentally, I want to mention 2 classes that you might be interested in. So one of them is this spring, I'm going to be teaching the class IT 515R, and it's going to be, I call it innovation, or interdisciplinary innovation design, and we get students from all across campus and do some project. It's a project-oriented class, but then we tie it to some of the theories and whatnot. And we're going to be designing an educational simulation focused on entrepreneurship and user experience design. So if anyone's interested in that, I'd love to have that. Another one that might be relevant is this fall, I'll be teaching IT 670, Web and Social Media Analytics. And we learn a bit of social network analysis, we do web analytics and Google analytics, and then talk about other kind of themes and topics. So those might be relevant. So the last, I guess, maybe 5 years or so, I've been exploring.
One more
Oh, yeah.
really quick thing. So I've heard good things from our students who have taken his classes. Some other classes that he didn't plug right now that they offer over there is, I've heard you guys before ask about a UX design class. Derek and his colleagues actually offer a couple of UX design classes over there as well that if anybody's interested, would be useful.
Yeah, so we have our intro UX design classes is IT 355, which you may or may not get credit for as grad students, but that's taught in the spring as well. And the other class, IT 555, I just taught, so probably won't be taught for a little while, but we will again in the future, advanced human-computer interaction. We'd love to have students. We design it so that we can have students with different backgrounds and we work together. So the last 5 years or so, I've been exploring the intersection between stories or narrative, learning, and fun, or games. And there's lots of interesting potential. We, as human beings, we're sort of designed to think in terms of stories. And there's a real power of stories. They help us empathize and put ourselves in the situation of others. Like nothing else, right? I mean, we all go to movies and we read books and do things that help us to experience things that maybe we couldn't experience on our own. And there's lots of other kind of interesting research that I haven't done that looks at how stories can actually help hold our attention and even change our brain chemistry in ways that mirror the experiences that those in the stories are having. And so my interest has always been in social technologies, and there's been lots of new ways that we collaborate around storytelling. There's, of course, fan fiction sites that take some story like Harry Potter and girls like, the kids, usually it's like 12 or 16-year-old girls, but there's others that write stories about the characters, and so they sort of enter this alternate reality of Harry Potter or Star Wars or whatever it is, and appropriate the story world to tell their own stories. And so we see that at fan fiction sites. There's also fun storytelling that happens just in the real world. So my kids love playing with little people, or they play town, they go outside and draw with chalk on the sidewalk, and they make their houses, and then they have the neighbor kids over, and there's always a policeman and a robber, because for some reason that's a fun, story. But we like to do make-believe stuff, right? And so there's other fun tools that let you collaboratively write stories. So there's things that do choose your own adventure type things, or you can pick up some story others have written and fork it, just like you would open source software. So lots of fun kind of opportunities. Meanwhile, there's also a bunch of ways that we can play stories. So an example, when I was a kid, this is a new interface for it, but the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, if you've read those books, the author of these actually decided that he was going to make a text adventure where at the time it was just text you would type in. And you type in things like, it starts off with, you wake up, the room is spinning very gently around your head, or at least it would be if you could see it, which you can't. It's pitch black. And then it just has a cursor that blinks, and you have to decide what to do. It's kind of like Linux. So you type it in, and you say something like, turn on the lights. And then it gives you feedback like this.
Sorry.
Anyway, so you get that, and then as you go, you kind of work through this scenario, and he's thought of all these different ways the stories could go, and giving you this interactive kind of experience. So we've had this for a while. Likewise, things like Dungeons and Dragons, where you role play characters and things like that have been around for a while. And then choose your own adventure stories. And now there's a lot of video games where the core game mechanic is that you explore a fictional world and the story kind of unfolds over time. So, that's one way my kids play Minecraft. There's these story worlds, and you kind of get dropped into it, and you go around, you read the signs, and you try to go, oh, this must have, some civilization used to be here, or whatever it is. If you played Myst, that was another older game, but some people kind of did that. So lots of opportunities to play stories. So and these are using digital technologies to play stories. What I've been interested in lately is how can we create opportunities where stories enter into our lives. And so there's been a number of different types of games and stories that we might call pervasive games. And they play out in the real world around us using everyday technologies. So one genre is the alternate reality game genre, which has been around since maybe 2000 or so, maybe before. And what happens in that is you have some storyline, and to advance the storyline, you have a whole community of players that have to solve puzzles and perform tasks that then the characters in the story, which look like real people, they might post YouTube videos, or they might be people you run into actually in the physical world, but they're actors, or they might send you email messages or text messages, but you interact with these characters as if they were real, and help them solve puzzles, and then you get the next kind of installment of the story, which happens across all different media types. So it might be video for one thing, or a website that's of a fictional company for another piece of content. But anyway, they have this ethos in alternate reality games that is TINAG, is what they call it for short. This is not a game. Now, obviously, the people playing it know it's a game. No one's really trying to trick you, at least in most of these, to thinking that it's some real-world conspiracy or something. But while you play, you sort of imagine that this is not a game. And you play as if you were playing as yourself. And so, for example, in World Without Oil, a game that was played a while ago, people envisioned the world where the gas prices went way up through the roof because of some Middle Eastern trouble, not too unrealistic scenario. And people would kind of post blogs and videos of themselves in this fictional world, what would they do? So, they're growing a garden, and each day in this fictional world amounted to a month. Each day in the real world amounted to a month in the fictional world. And so people would, upload these it was collaborative storytelling in that kind of alternate reality game. Other ones are more puzzle-based, where you go around solving puzzles and then you get new bases. So anyway, that's kind of a fun genre. There's other games, location-based games like Ingress, which there might be a story overlaid on it. In this one, there's a story about these two competing groups, and you play as one of these groups, and you try to overtake territory with your mobile phone checking in essentially different locations. And there's more to it than that, but that's kind of the way it works. And you see a picture here of people playing an alternate reality game where they would give the phone numbers and times on these websites, and then you would go to these pay phones, and then the phone would ring, and it would be some fictional character. But you can imagine that these are very immersive experiences because they play out in your own, world and context. And there's a couple of properties that make that the case. So one is these lend themselves very much to experiential learning. So we're actually doing the thing because it needs to be done, and it's a very authentic experience. We think they lead to high transfer. And I'll give you an example. In our Dust game, we had players that were using Google Docs to collaborate in this Excel spreadsheet, or Google Doc version Excel spreadsheet. And my hunch is because they're using some of the exact same skills, like how do I collaborate on these documents, that when they go to collaborate on those documents in classes later in high school or whatever, that they'll just naturally know how to do it. Sometimes in fictional stories or in simulations, we don't use real technologies. We use some kind of not quite as authentic thing. And so here we hope that transferability would be good because they're using real technologies, at least for part of it. Another thing we've been exploring is identity. So we've been very interested in getting middle school and high school kids to think of themselves as scientists or people interested in computational thinking, and that's okay, even if they're maybe not inclined to say that in public. So how can we get them to change their attitude towards, I don't want to admit that I'm a closet geek, to being able to say, oh, I associate with NASA in that school, and I can talk about that. And because in alternate reality games and other genres we'll talk about, you play as yourself, you don't play as an avatar in some virtual reality world. You play as yourself using everyday technologies, and you talk to people, and often there's a profile picture of yourself or what you chose to put up. We think that in these settings, if in the game, for example, you take our quiz that tells you would make a great biologist or astronaut, and you pick what role you like, that we hope that some of that will stick with you after. And it's not, again, because it's not just your character that you chose to be an astronaut, it's you. You're the one posting things about videos about you in this alternate reality, and you chose what job title. We hope that might actually affect your identity long term. And then another thing we've been exploring is how can we embed assessments into these kind of experiences. And so, for example, in our alternate reality game, I'll show you examples of this, but in the game Dust, we have quiz questions that are really polls that the characters post. And so they say things like, I can't believe, this other character thinks this is, fun, I hate learning science, or something like that. And then we have questions like, I totally agree, or no way, science is cool, or different responses. And they're taking these polls, and we're actually using those as a way of collecting data on them. But they complete them, hopefully they're not as boring as a typical survey, they're actually kind of responding to characters, and they can see what everyone else voted on, and things like that. So we're actually right now looking at data to say, does that technique work? Is it consistent with the other surveys we did, and does it get validated? But lots of fun opportunities to embed games. So I'm going to talk through a few, if I can advance the next slide. There we go. 3 examples of things, and these are all at different stages of projects that we've been engaged in. And unfortunately, in one way, a lot of this, we're still doing the evaluations of. So we have lots of things that we hope will be true. But in any event, we've learned lots of things from doing this, and I'll try to leave enough time for questions so that I can share some of what we learned, at least on the design side of it. But we have, one of these projects is an NSF-sponsored project that Rick West has been involved with, and some of you. And we're interested in changing attitudes towards STEM, and also learning a bit of content knowledge in these alternate reality games. We're doing 2 of them. So Dust is the one that we ran at the beginning of last year, and right now we're doing a replayable version of it that some teachers and librarians are running right as we speak. And then we're working on, right now I actually have students at the STEM fair that are promoting our next game that'll launch in the summer called the Tessera, and it's focused on computational thinking. So anyway, that's one line of research. Another one that's been kind of fun has been a collaboration with John Balzati, who teaches technical writing, and we've been designing some educational simulations, but they take a lot of principles from alternate reality games and embed those into them. And so I'll show you that example. And then the last one, I don't know that I'll talk much about, but I have a student, has anyone participated in an escape the room experience? So not too many in this audience. So these are like a new kind of emerging form of entertainment. There's a group here in Provo, there's actually a couple now, and all over in different countries. But basically they lock you and a group of people into a room, and there's puzzle clues all around you, and you have to solve these puzzles to get out of the room. And they time you, and you have an hour, and if you don't make it out, then you fail. Usually you die or something in this fictional story. And if you make it out early, you hold up a sign that says like how long, what your time was, and they take a group photo of you. So we're actually designing with a grad student escape the room for cybersecurity evaluation. So we're right now there's lots of cybersecurity competitions that you have to use your skills to try to hack into other computers and whatnot. This one, we lock you in a room, and it's like, we're still working on the storyline, but one scenario that we've played with is it's a nuclear facility, and it goes in lockdown, so it's just you and your group are in the room, and it'll melt down if you can't solve the puzzles in there. Or maybe spy espionage. But anyway, so kind of a fun opportunity. But all of these are, again, the stories that encroach on our own real life, and there's some education potential. So just for context, the alternate reality game Dust was focused, really the core thing we were trying to teach was scientific inquiry. So how do we come up with the questions, how do we evaluate data, how do we collaborate with others to come to consensus, things like that. The Tessera, which is coming out this summer, is focused on computational thinking, problem solving and computer technologies. And then this is one that we did when I was at Maryland called the Arcane Gallery of Gadgetry, which was focused on a few of these cryptography and also historical teaching and whatnot. And that was meant to be run inside a class with just a small group. These other ones are kind of larger scale. We had a couple thousand people participated in Dust, and then we're doing replayable things now with like a classroom teacher they run through it. So I'm going to jump over there, but while I pull this up, any questions on just kind of high level alternate reality games or some of these other pervasive play experiences?
How long does it take you to develop one of these?
A ton of time. Yeah, so it depends on what one, right? So the smaller scale one we did in a lot less time, a few months really. And
how many people?
One writer, a website person who did graphic design and website development, and like 4 other faculty involved with different projects, coming up with puzzles and things like that. So that would be, maybe a smaller scale one. Dust was a full year. as is the test run, and if not a little more. But that's largely because there's lots of original artwork, lots of original coding that we use. So you could pull these off a lot easier if you just use off-the-shelf technologies, which a lot of the users do.
And this is a hard question to ask, answer. What percentage would you say is narrative theory that goes into it as opposed to instructional design theory?
It's a real mix of all of those. So like on the project with Dust, we have June On, who's at Maryland, who's a great education researcher, studies social collaboration technologies. And he's currently in charge of the human-computer interaction lab there at Maryland. And so he was our educator, the main educator. We also have Stephen Shumway here, who's in technology and engineering education. He's done a great job. So those are kind of two, and then students associated with them. We also have Carrie Krause at Maryland, who is she has a joint English and iSchool appointmentship, and she does narrative theory and all this kind of story. And she oversees the writers a lot. And then my own experience is more on the technology side and user experience design. And yeah, so I end up doing some of that. And so that's kind of the main areas of expertise. And then we also hired a game designer. Tinder Transmedia was our game designer. They help with narrative and artwork as well. And so that it takes kind of all that to pull off a project at this game. Let me see. Sorry, lots of. Oops. Okay. So I'm going to quickly. So this is Iris. Just a fun little interactive thing. The kids like to poke a lot. And by the way, as we develop this game and other games, we have a process where, and part of what we're studying is the design process of co-designing with teams. So we meet most Fridays, last semester and before when we were doing Dust, and we have them come in and they help us come up with ideas, everything from character ideas to storyline ideas to technology, and then they play test our prototypes. And we see, often we learn that we've got things that are harder, or too easy or too hard, and they help get us get that right. So here, I'm actually already logged in, so there's a little different invitation. Don't do that, but let me just show you quickly the way that you play this game. And so right here, I'll go over to actually our posts. So a lot of this is told through character posts, and we have illustrated fictional characters here. Let me make this a little bigger. That for Dust, the story was told through this online comic book style, interactive comic book, basically online. And so you can see that we have our characters, and this is the static version that's mobile friendly. We also have, I meant to click on the other one. The other one's a little more exciting. So you actually scroll down, it has parallax effects that make it look a little, and there's sound that I don't have turned on right now. But we see Iris kind of float in. And the storyline basically has these kids that are at NASA, they're there to witness this cool meteor shower. And then what happens is, over time, or by the end of this, we introduce our characters. And by the way, some of them have social media accounts, and you can find them on, on Facebook or other places. And then after we introduce them, this meteorite shower happens, and some the adults all around collapse. And so in this storyline, the teenagers have to figure out basically what happened now that all the adults have collapsed. And that was our way to say, you're empowered, you're in charge. So we tell the story, and then we release different story bits. as they solve different puzzles. So this ran for about 8 weeks or so in February last year. Now we've repackaged this into a replayable thing, so a teacher advances, it's like 10 days. And so they'll have a set of activities they do the first day. So for example, the first day, we have challenges and posts. And so Iris is this artificial intelligence that's still around because she's just a computer program. And so she's been trying to act like a teenager, so she speaks in memes and things, right? And this is to kind of appeal to them more, so it's not just all text. So she has like, here's what happened, and little clips. And then you can watch some collapsed videos that we encourage the players to upload. So it's like, upload one of your parents clapping. So we have one of Rick and his daughter filmed. They're all doing the BYU fight song, and then all of a sudden the adults collapse and the kids are like, what happened? So part of this is storytelling to get them immersed in this story. And then we have other activities, and it would take like hours to go through it all because this was a long thing that went out, so we're not going to do that. But here's an example of, we have a bunch of apps that get released. And so this is one app that gets released. It's our brain scanner app, and body scanner. So what you would do is, it doesn't really work, but you point it at an adult, you hit scan, and it goes, and plays some nice sounds, and it shows a little heat sensor, and then it shows vital signs. It's not in the screenshot, but it'll say and what happens is we find out through this, we don't tell you this, the kids figure out that there's still a heartbeat, so these adults aren't dead, but their core temperature dropped, and there's some other things we learned. Later we get a brain scanner, and find out what parts of their brain are active, and they have to actually look up, what parts of their brain. That's part of the learning, is the different functions of the brain and whatnot. And they find out that they're dreaming, and that they're alive, but they're in some other state. So then the kids, this is all evidence. So they would, and so Iris kind of posts like, here's what you need to do: upload screenshots of your data and compare it, and then you go to the forum, or here, and you can do like, add a question or theory or evidence, or you can look at other people's posts. And right now, I'm not logged in. This isn't the live game or a historical archive, but we would have posts by other players. And so you would click on one, and it would say, it would have text, and they could upload videos or other things. And I can reply here, or I can actually tag it as a follow-up question, and it relates to astronomy, or add other tags and then post it. And then it'll show related posts if we have those. So a lot of the and then people can vote on these, which is our way of promoting different good practices, right? So is it clear? Do they collaborate with others in a meaningful way? Is there evidence? Do they tell a compelling and believable story? Is it a unique idea? And so people are posting, theories, evidence, questions. And then what we did during the live game is that we had game runners. Now it's a teacher, but it was other college students that worked on the project, people like you, and they would actually monitor these, and they would go around and vote, and they would go and reply to people's comments and actually push them. They would reply as characters, but they would sort of push them to engage more deeply with the thing. So if they make a comment and say, this maybe something that isn't really backed up well with evidence, then we might have a character that says, that's an interesting idea. Do you have any evidence for that? Or, can you share some ideas on how would you know that it's true? So that's the problem with ARGs, is that they take a lot of resources, and they typically only run once. So part of our grant was, we're going to figure out how to make these replayable, and that's what we've been exploring now, and we're running that now with us. But that's the idea. And then there's also other things like our little quiz, which I won't, but it's like a BuzzFeed quiz, and this is the one that tells you what kind of scientist you might like to be. We have biologists and planetary science. We focused on a few different areas. And then once you fill that out, you go to your profile page. And one of the things we learned is alternate reality games for adults. Adults really are self-motivated. The ones who play alternate reality games, they'll hunt down any, if you have our collaborators mentioned in one of their alternate reality games they designed, there was some guy in the background who had a hat on it, it had a phone number, but they didn't actually mean for that was like not intentional, it just happened to be this trucker hat or something from a character. Well, the players in these alternate reality games see that and they all start calling the number and figuring out whose it is and all this, and so they didn't even mean for that to happen. So the point is, like, in the adult alternate reality games, which pretty much that's all there was when we started doing these ones for kids, they're, they just hunt down things and they use technology that they already know and a lot of skills they already have. Well, when we started designing these for teens and when we play tested this, and Rick saw some of this, but we needed to really bolster the educational scaffolding because they didn't know how to interact with this game. It's not like any other game they've played with. Like, you don't upload videos of your parents collapsing or something as part of the game usually, right? So what we did to scaffold, we did a couple things. So we designed this badge system. So we have all these badges and you get them for doing different things, like taking the quiz and choosing a job title. So here's the job titles that the quiz kind of lets you pick, and so you choose geoscientist, and they have descriptions of these in the write-up. And then that would give you a badge, or you vote on other people's things. So this kind of badge system helped. It made it very explicit, some things they could do, and some of the players like to get, if there's 10 badges, they want them all. So they start, posting things. Another thing we did was, of course, through our game runners, we scaffolded learning, so when people would post, we would give them challenges and other things. And then through our updates page, which is here, we originally did, we totally changed how we did the IRIS post and the NASA team post. I think I have to advance this to another day to see it, but this is all the IRIS posts. So if you came to the game late, you would see her first post and then the most recent one. And you could sort of get caught up to speed by going through those, which is important because people come and go in these games. And then we had the NASA teams, and then you could see all the posts. So that's kind of the idea. There were a bunch of different apps that we roll out. Some of these were 3D environments. We have great illustration students, so this is the ISS. And you can click around, and we have little embedded things that are kind of like clues. So we call this says transit planet data. And that's all it says. But later on, there's other things where if you just Google transit data, you would learn that this is a technique for telling how planets go around. And later we release another app where they actually look at transit data. And they see, and they try to figure out how many planets are going around some of the stars close by. So we've got, some of these other ones link out to just interesting places. So Kerbal Space Game, or the scale of the universe, maybe you've seen this, just fun things that we want people to explore. So some of this is informal learning, open-ended, fun video clips of astronauts doing stuff. So in any event, those are some of the apps we release. We have a Mars rover that gets released where you control a little rover and then you carbon date the meteorites, and you have to, not carbon date, because carbon's half-life is too small. I can't remember what isotope they use, but it's, rated. So those are the kinds of things that we have them engaged with, and they're all kind of hands-on experiences. And because it's a fictional world, you're not going to really be able to control Mars rover, but we can let them do that, right? Or we have a microbe scanner where they scan for microbes, and then later they genetically engineer them so that they'll kill this alien microbe, is what the storyline works. And we let them do these things they couldn't normally do, but it introduces the concepts at a level they can engage with. So that's kind of a whirlwind tour of dust and what we've been doing. We did learn, there were players that really got into this. One of the things we were interested in is we really wanted to appeal to boys and girls. We were very successful in that. Half of our players were girls. And half of the core players that really got into it were girls, which we felt really good about. We think the story elements in particular appeal to the girls, and the way that they play is a little different, but in general that's true. But some of the puzzles appeal to both, and so that was interesting, and we're still analyzing that data. And then we have all of our, some of these other things with our embedded assessments and whatnot that we're analyzing. So we have Google Analytics running on this, and we capture everything you do, including clicks on when you go off-site. And so we're looking at, you know, did this actually prompt people to go to different sites? So anyway, that's dust. Any questions on that? Yeah.
Did you attempt to include any kind of assessments in this first dust?
We did. So we have, well, some of them were really trying to understand their attitudes towards science. So we did have, before you could even get into here, you had to take this is supposed to be NASA's secret collab environment, this collaboration platform. And Iris, the computer program, makes you fill out this survey that scientists, like your attitudes towards science survey, that's kind of how we wove in the standard one. And then we did these polls by characters where they would vote and things. So we're looking at that data more like, can we relate that data? And then we did a post survey. Unfortunately, a lot of the post surveys didn't get filled out, which is typical. And we did have a core group of players that worked through the whole game, and unfortunately, we also had players that just disappear, which happens, right? So they come and do something and then they forget about it. So we're excited to see the replayable version where you have a teacher that can kind of oversee it, and we know everyone will take the pre and the post survey. So that data will be coming in the coming months. Right now, they're kind of in the midst of it. And we have other instruments. We'll do interviews with them. But we did interview a lot of the kids, and we learned a ton. Some of them really describe it as, I've never done anything like this where we were in charge. You hear comments like, there's not many places online that I can go where I feel safe from bullying and things like that. And they're like, this was an awesome community. They felt like they were part of this whole big thing. And you know, one student said, I wish we could use the same people here that helped solve this to go solve real world problems now, because we've learned how to work together and stuff. I mean, really compelling stuff. Now that's from a subset. That's unfortunately only in the dozens of players, right, that really got so into it that they were immersed. And it turns out most of them are already science geeks. Now that doesn't mean this won't work for non-science geeks, but it means that you need a teacher to make them play, which is our other model. So we'll see if that works. And we'll have some good assessments for, do they enjoy it, do they feel it, do they learn as well, you know, do they interact with it in different ways through that. So anyway, that's a lot of that has yet to be determined, but it's really kind of rewarding to see, at least for some of these kids, it was really transformational. And they talk about it that way. The other, and I'm going to switch gears now and talk about a different project. And it's interesting because this one started with alternate reality games and said, how can we make these educational, and how can we fit them into, part of our goal was make a replayable version of it too, into more of a traditional education setting, or maybe after school club or something. But the other project, I had a professor come to me and say, I've heard you've done these interactive story things, I'm interested in educational simulations. And he came from the perspective of, and you guys know, there's a lot of research on simulations and case studies. He was kind of like, there's lots of good, we know case studies are better than some other forms of learning. And in writing, in technical writing, we want to give you an experience, these writers an experience where they learn skills of professionalism, things like sending emails that aren't just like shoddily written, but like, actual good content. They also want them to think about collecting evidence and making clear arguments. So some of these learning outcomes related to writing. And so I said, it's kind of interesting, that starts with the education, and then we've been pushing that the other direction to make it more realistic and like an ARG, but they both are meeting in this interesting ARG simulation kind of thing. So so this is a project this is just our landing page for these simulations, and I'm going to log in just as a, sorry. All right, we'll log in as Sue. And what this is, so let me just back up a day. So these ones are much more scaffolded. They're not as ambiguous, not as collaborative. We have thoughts of making them collaborative, but right now this is an individual experience. But you could talk with it in your class. We piloted, did anyone see our pilot test through technical writing? Probably not, because it's an undergrad technical writing class, but we tried this last semester and it was fun. So what we have here is you are an intern that just got hired at Microcore. They make nanotechnology. And so we have this little story that unfolds. This is Bob, the intern supervisor. I wonder if I can just, let me see if I, will I get if I play this?
Let's give it a shot.
Maybe we mute the
I
other
don't think
one.
so.
We're gonna have Bob introduce himself real quick. He's kind of this, like, the office character. You can watch him. You can't hear, but anyway, you get
I
this
just
real.
muted mine, maybe try.
That's okay. I probably have to switch his microphone. It's pointing to. It's not worth it. But anyway, you get the idea just from watching him. He's this kind of like over the top, actor. We added a little humor, so he makes some jokes during this and that. But what we have is over here is our scaffolding, which has worked really well. So we have these tasks that you check off as you complete them. And we've got this intranet site. So we have voicemail, and you can place a video call to different people. And most of them aren't there on day one, but we have these videos. So like if I advance to day 2, then I have some tasks like, review various documents, or I think on day 3 is where we have interview people. So interview Andy. And so to do that, I would go to the phone, video call, and then click on Andy. Now we're redoing the interface right now to make it more chat-like. And right now my student's probably working on it. This has a video of Andy, and then it looks kind of like a Skype interface. And then we have this question bank of questions that you can ask him, because we have to have them pre-scripted. This is what it's like. And then you would click on one, it'll send it, and again, we're editing this part of it, so it'll have their name right here, and bleep it, and then it would jump to the part of the video that plays his response to that question. So the storyline is there's these microbots that go out of control, and they kill this pig, and so we have to figure out what happened and what to do about it. And so you write this internal proposal that's kind of in this environment. But in the meantime, you're getting emails from people that introduce you to corporate politics and whatnot. You're getting files, like style guides and some educational scaffolding. We have some photos of the crime scene and little notes that are also kind of evidence. So this is where we have the evidence, and we have to use that to make arguments for their proposal. So that's the idea. And then we're working on, but we don't have the whole kind of setup for the back end for the teachers, but we'll have this sort of back end for how we can do that. And then we can have the teachers release content from characters. So we can say, like, they can customize a message that's pre-written by Bob, but they would add, like if they reviewed the emails, they want to give feedback to the whole class on here's the things that most emails didn't do. In this one, there's lots of interns, so he can address them like, interns. And he says whatever he says, and then we have the bullet points that the teacher or the TA would fill in, like, make sure you do this to improve your writing. So that's the idea. It's kind of this interactive scenario. This spring, we're going to be designing one of these, but it'll be more around creating your own app, and it'll be user experience. The assignments will be like low fidelity prototypes, interviews, and other things that you would do to kind of as research for building an app. I'd love to have some of you in there and really help me deeply engage with the educational learning and whatnot. This one we're working on getting ready for a high school audience. So we have a high school educator here that we're working with, Dewan Combs, that some of you may know. But that's a project. So anyway, we're low on time. I'm happy to stick around and take questions. But that's what we've been up to, and we haven't done a full evaluation of this, but we're in the process. Are there any last questions? Or I assume we probably wrap up at 10 till.
Yeah.
Essentially.
So if there's no questions, thank you, Derek.